Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Ditero Magwala, and this program is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Pagama Research and Development. So in today's lesson, we are still looking at our grade 12 final examination revision, and today we are focusing on diversity of reproductive strategies. So we are going to be looking at the types of fertilization, internal fertilization, external fertilization, vivipary, ovipary, as well as ovovivipary, as well as parental care. So let's just have a look at the breakdown of what we will look at, and then we will get to our tips. So firstly, we will look at the roles of the reproductive strategies in animals, and mainly here, this is with the aim of maximizing reproductive success, making sure that young are born alive and then they survive after birth, and so on, right? So we will look at internal and external fertilization, ovipary, vivipary, ovovivipary, as we've said, amniotic egg. We are also going to look at the structure of the amniotic egg and the functions of the different parts, right? And we will look at precocial as well as altricial development. So there we will be looking at the different types of young and how that comes about, right? And lastly, we will look at parental care and the role that it plays in the survival of the young. All right, so by the end of our lesson today, we should be able to differentiate between internal and external fertilization. And I believe this is quite self-explanatory. Internal meaning inside and external meaning outside, right? You should be able to describe the advantages and disadvantages of the two types of fertilization. So both of them have some pros and some cons, or some disadvantages and advantages. We are going to look at that as well. And then the different types of or methods of reproduction, we are going to look at that, as well as their advantages and disadvantages. You should be able to label and give functions of the part of the amniotic egg. So we will be looking at the amniotic egg as well. Altricial and precocial development, you should be able to differentiate between those. And lastly, the different types of parental care. All right, so just another reminder, our paper is a paper that is out of 150 marks, and it is out of 150 minutes. So 2.5 hours is 150 minutes for 150 marks. Section A, we have 50 marks, and section B, we have 100 marks. That is broken down into two questions. We have question 2 and question 3. Now, in question 2 and 3, both questions are similar. You are going to be given long questions in this section, whereas in section A, you will be given short questions, which are multiple choice, biological terms, as well as the match column questions. Right, our examination tips, again, we are going to emphasize the examination tips that are related to the marking of your paper, which comes from the marking principles that are used by the markers. Right, so we have here, if more information than marks is allocated is given, stop marking when maximum marks are reached, and place a wavy line and max in the right hand margin to indicate that you've reached the maximum marks, right? So no need to write more answers than required. Secondly, if, for example, 3 reasons are required and 5 are given, mark only the first 3, irrespective of whether all or some of them are correct or incorrect. If whole process is given when only part of it is required, read all and credit the relevant part. And then number 4, if comparisons are asked for and descriptions are given, accept if differences and similarities are clear. So if you do not have a clear answer on what are the similarities and what are the differences, then you will not be credited. If tabulation is required but paragraphs are given, candidates will lose marks for not tabulating. So you will still get marks, but you will lose that 1 mark for tabulating, and we do not want to be losing any marks. So follow the instructions as given. Next, if diagrams are given with annotations when descriptions are required, candidates will lose marks. So do not lose those marks. Do not give diagrams and annotations, which you are rarely asked to do. So usually it is descriptions that are required. If flowcharts are given instead of descriptions, candidates will lose marks. Again, if they say describe, make sure you describe. all illustrations must have a caption. So your graphs, your table, your drawings must have a caption or a heading. And lastly, if only the letter is asked for, but only the name is given and vice versa, candidates will lose marks. If they want the name, give the name. If they want the letter, give the letter. All right. Now, some of the things that will help you to easily remember what we will be looking at today is the tips on the diversity of reproductive strategies. So firstly, we have ovipary. Now with ovipary, it starts with the letter O, and ovipary means a development that takes place outside of the mother's body. So ovipary, O, outside, also starts with O. So that is how you can remember this. And once you remember ovipary, it means that you will be able to remember vivipary. So this is outside the mother's body and it is inside an amniotic egg, right? And then vivipary will then be inside the mother's body. This is inside the uterus, nowhere else but inside the uterus, right? And then we have ovovivipary. As you can see with the color coding, I used red for ovipary and yellow for vivipary. So this one, ovovivipary, would be somehow a combination of both. So ovipary is outside the mother's body, inside the amniotic egg, right? So ovovivipary, ovo would be inside an amniotic egg, vivipary would be inside the mother's body. So this one takes place inside the mother's body but inside an egg. So that is how it differs from vivipary. However, it also differs from ovipary because it's inside an amniotic egg but outside the mother's body. And then with precocial and altricial, precocial, how you remember that? The offspring or the young hatch when they are prepared, meaning that they are prepared to take care of themselves, they are prepared to feed themselves, they are prepared to just face the outside world as a whole, right? So precocial, prepared, okay? And then the other one will be altricial, and altricial will mean that they are poorly developed, meaning that they cannot see, they cannot move around, and so on. We are going to be looking at those characteristics later on. Okay, last two things. I'm going to emphasize this every time. Make sure you read all the information provided before answering your questions. Read everything. That one sentence at the top of a diagram, that one paragraph before you get to the questions, read it. Read it to understand it. Use your pencil to underline the important points. Go to your questions, read your questions, go back to the paragraph if you have to. Read that information once more just to make sure that you understand what is happening with the question and the information that you've been given. And then lastly, know your terminologies. Terminologies are very important, especially for section A, right? Okay, now we have come to the end of our terminology, of our exam tips. Now let's have a look at some terminologies. As we just said, you must know your terminologies. So the first one would be fertilization. Remember, we'll be looking at internal and external fertilization. So let's first understand what is fertilization. Here we are looking at a process during which the sperm fuses with the egg to produce a diploid zygote, right? And then secondly, we have external fertilization. This is a process during which the sperm fuses with the egg outside of the female's body. Okay, outside. External means outside, right? Internal fertilization, this is the process during which the sperm fuses with the egg inside the female's reproductive organs. All right, and then we have ovipary, a method of reproduction in which eggs are laid and development of these eggs occurs outside the mother's body. So that is ovipary, right? Ovipary, outside the mother's body. Vivipary, a type of reproduction in which young develops inside the mother's uterus after internal fertilization, right? So fertilization with vivipary always has to be internal. Okay, and then the next one, ovovivipary, refers to a type of reproduction in which eggs develop within the mother's body and hatch inside the mother's body before being born. So the hatching takes place inside the mother's body. So the mother does not release the egg and then hatching takes place outside. The egg hatches inside and then the mother gives birth. Okay, next one we have is precocial development and altricial development, as well as parental care. Precocial development refers to birds that are hatched with eyes open, covered with down. So the fact that they are covered with down or feathers shows that they are well developed, and they leave the nest within 2 days. So they leave the nest very early to show that they are prepared to take care of themselves, basically. Altricial development, this refers to birds that are hatched with their eyes closed, with little to no down feathers, incapable of departing from the nest, and they are fed by their parents. So these ones are poorly developed, they cannot take care of themselves, meaning that parental care is needed. And then what is parental care? This refers to the ways in which parents increase the chances of survival of their offspring. All right, let's move on to our types of fertilization. So we have 2 types of fertilization, as I've said. So remember, this is for the formation of a diploid zygote, when the sperm cell and the ovum come together or fuse to have that diploid zygote. Remember again, the sperm cell is haploid and the ovum or the egg cell are haploid. Then when they come together or fuse, the zygote will be diploid. So here we have external fertilization and internal fertilization. As you can see here, the female fish would release its ova, and the male fish would also release its sperm cells. Then these two would fuse outside of the female's body, right? Meaning that development would then take place outside of the body as well. And then internal fertilization, the male would release the sperm cells into the female's body, and fertilization would take place inside the female's body, right? So obviously, as we have just said, external fertilization takes place outside of the female's body, right? So it means that the fusion of these two gametes takes place outside, and there is no need for physical contact between the two organisms. So the two parents do not need to physically be close to each other, and water is required for this. So the sperm needs to be able to swim towards the egg for fertilization to take place. So water is a requirement here. And as you can see, these type of organisms actually release a lot of sperm cells and egg cells at the same time, so that they can increase the chances of fertilization. Now, why do we really need the water? We need to keep the egg moist as the development is taking place, so that it does not dry out, right? And then it is also a medium for the movement of the sperm, for the sperm to be able to swim towards the egg. Sometimes you would find that these organisms do remain close to each other during this process, just so the distance in which the sperm has to travel towards the egg is not that long. Now, that is one of the ways in which reproductive success can be increased, just to make sure that some of the sperm cells do not get washed away as they are trying to swim towards the egg cells. However, the physical contact is really not a must. Okay, so many sperms that are produced may not reach the eggs, right? So how is this overcome? It needs to be overcome. Therefore, they produce a large number of sperms, so that at least some of the sperm cells will reach the egg cell, should some of them be washed away by winds, be destroyed by predators, or be washed away by the water, right? Some of the examples that we have here can be frogs as well as fish. So those are some of the organisms that display external fertilization. Okay, now the fact that the sperm cell or the egg cell can be washed away is one of the disadvantages for external fertilization, because the chances of reproductive success get reduced in that way. And then we have internal fertilization. So this is a process whereby the sperm and the egg will fuse inside the female's body. So there needs to be physical contact between the two organisms. The male will deposit its sperm inside the female's reproductive organ in this case, right? As we can see here, the ovaries are there within the female's body, meaning the egg cells are there, and the sperm cells would then be released into the female's body to make sure that fertilization chances are increased there, right? So Fertilization, the sperm cells are released into the female's body. Fertilization will take place inside the female's body. And in this case, there is no need for water as a medium for anything because everything is taking place inside the female body. So this is one of the methods of fertilization that is important in terrestrial organisms or in terrestrial animals, because if they are found on land, it means that they do not have water, right? They are not living in water. Therefore, these organisms that live on dry land need internal fertilization for fertilization or reproduction to be successful. Right now, this is something that's different from external fertilization in the sense that the amount of sperm cells that are produced in this case are not as high as with external fertilization, because the chances of success are already great. Here there are no predators, there is no water to wash off the sperm or the egg cells, and there are no winds to blow away the sperms and egg cells. So internal fertilization can be an advantage because the reproductive success here increases. The egg cell, the sperm cell are safe, and that zygote after fertilization has taken place is also safe within the mother's body. And examples here, we have mammals, we have humans, we also have birds that are experience internal fertilization. So, as I just said, there are a lot of advantages than disadvantages in this case, because this ensures that the sperm cell and the egg cell come into contact within the mother's body. Unlike when the animal, the female releases the egg cell, the male releases the egg cell, and chances of them coming together are reduced in that way, right? And the developing embryo is protected from predators, as I have said, which is different from external fertilization. Now let's move on to ovipary. Right, now this method of reproduction it's a method in which the eggs are laid and development of these eggs occur outside of the mother's body. Again, ovipary, outside. Right, so these eggs can be fertilized internally and then released, or fertilized externally outside the mother's body after they have been laid, and then the development would then start. Right, so the egg will hatch into a young animal. So the egg develops outside. That is the main thing that you should remember here. Development of the egg is outside. Right, so we know there are animals that leave their eggs to develop outside, as we can see with the chicken here. The chicken would usually check on their developing eggs. However, they develop outside throughout the period of development. Now, what are the disadvantages for this? The eggs may be eaten by predators. We know that there are predators all over, and the eggs may even break, right? So the chances of reproductive success can be reduced in this case because of the fact that the eggs are not protected. How can we avoid this? Parental care. It means that the parent should take care of the eggs throughout the period of development, just to ensure that reproductive success is increased in that way. So protection of the eggs by the parents is one of the things that is needed in this case. Right, and examples here, we have hens and we have frogs as well. So frogs lay their eggs outside, and development takes place outside. Okay, now with vivipary, this is a type of reproduction in which the young develops inside the mother's uterus after internal fertilization. So with ovipary, fertilization can be internal or external with ovipary. Now with vivipary, fertilization is only internal. Here, fertilization is internal and development is internal. During development, the young will receive nutrients from the mother's blood via the placenta. So here there is that connection between the young and the mother through the placenta, whereby the umbilical cord will be the transport of the food from the mother's blood to the developing embryo. So here the young are born active. Okay. And then what are the advantages here? Here there are more advantages than disadvantages. And remember, when we talk about these advantages, we are usually referring to how they increase the chances of success or reproductive success, basically. So we look at how reproductive success can be increased, okay, because that is the main thing. When reproduction takes place, we want the reproduction to be a success. Now, how do we increase the success? Okay, internal fertilization occurs, thus increases the chances of fertilization. Just the chances of fertilization, before we even go to the chances of reproductive success. How is reproduction a success in this case? Just fertilization on its own, is it going to be successful, right? So it increases the chances of fertilization because we don't have an egg cell far away from the sperm cell. Therefore, we know there is actually almost 0% chances of the egg cell not coming into contact with the sperm cell, right? Development occurs within the mother's body. We know if development is within the mother's body, there's no way predators can ever reach that developing young, right? And then the young are born well developed, and therefore they are less prone to being attacked. Less chances of them being attacked because mostly they are well developed and they can take care of themselves, basically. If parental care is present, then the chances of survival of the young are even further increased. Now we are moving into parental care there. After birth, some organisms take care of their young. Humans being an example, we know that after humans give birth to their babies, they take care of them for a very long time until the babies are able to feed themselves, they're able to walk on their own, they're able to take care of themselves, right? And in humans, it actually even takes much, much longer as compared to other animals. And mammals would be an example of that, and that includes humans. Next, let's have a look at ovovivipary. Keep in mind here we are looking at a combination of the two. Ovo, that will be taking us to ovipary. Ovipary, remember we are talking about the amniotic egg, right? And then vivipary, we are talking about inside the mother's body, right? So this happens inside an egg, inside the mother's body. This is the type of reproduction in which the eggs are produced, but the eggs develop within the mother's body and they may hatch within the mother's body before the mother gives birth, right? So hatching takes place inside the body and then birth takes place afterwards. So the young are born alive and they get their nutrition from the egg. Another difference between vivipary and ovovivipary. Remember, with vivipary, the young get their food from the mother's body, right? Or yes, their nutrients from the mother's body. In this case, the young get their nutrients from the egg itself, right? So the egg yolk would be the one that provides the food instead of receiving it from the mother's body. Remember here we don't have the same contact between the developing young with the mother, so the egg will be the one that provides the nutrition. So as we can see, we would have the egg there, and then we would have the developing young inside that egg, inside the mother's body, as you can see on that diagram there. Okay, because this takes place inside the mother's body, fertilization is internal, right? So internal fertilization basically happens with all three types of reproduction. That is another thing that you must keep in mind. Ovipary, it's internal and external fertilization. Vivipary, internal fertilization. Ovovivipary, internal fertilization. So if you are asked there, quickly think, internal fertilization happens everywhere. However, ovipary can either be internal or external, right? So we know internal fertilization increases the chances of fertilization, successful fertilization, because the egg, the sperm are inside the body, right? And also it means that the chances of survival of the developing young are increased because it's inside the mother's body. Therefore, they are well taken care of and they are protected from predators, right? So great chance of the offspring being produced, great chance of reproductive success there. So the survival will increase. Examples here, we have some fish, some reptiles, and some invertebrates. As we can see, we looked at a fish just now as one of the examples of that. We also do have fish that are an example of ovipary. So it doesn't mean all fish are ovoviviparous. There are those that are oviparous. Okay, let's have a look at our first activity. It says the following diagram shows the percentage of survivors in 3 different vertebrate populations over a period of time. So we have our time in months on our x-axis. We have the percentage of organisms surviving on our y-axis. And then we have 3 curves or lines, A, B, and C. And as we can see with time, on A, there is a decrease. And then as the time goes further and further, there is that stabilization. And then with B, as time goes on, there is a decrease. With C, there is that stableness that we are seeing there, and then equilibrium, and then we can see a decrease as more time goes on. So at A, we have fish, B, we have birds, and C, we have humans. I think if you remember from your grade 11, the growth curves, this is something that we have done, whereby we know that with time, humans would show the death phase more at an older age than at a younger age, and parental care is one of the reasons for that. Now let's get into our questions. Okay, so before we get into the questions, there is a description of what is happening with those 3 curves. This is what I was saying earlier. Make sure that you read all that information. Don't just jump to 2.3.1. Read this information. Again, before we even read, let's have a look at this caption. It says the following graph shows the percentage of survivors in 3 different vertebrate populations over a period of time. We have the independent variable and we have the dependent variable. As I always say, the information has the sentence or the paragraph has important information. Now, by simply reading that, you can easily be able to know which one is the dependent variable and which one is the independent variable. And you can maybe even be able to draw the graphs that you are already provided with in your paper maybe. Curve A shows that many offspring die when they are young. Right? At A, many offspring die when they are young. They die here because this is where they are. They are still very young, right? Let's say this is at 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. So they are still young when they die, because we can see the organisms surviving is decreasing in this case, right? Okay, B shows that the offspring gradually die over time. So they just gradually die over time. They do not die when they are young. They just keep dying, basically. Curve C shows that most of the offspring survive and that death occurs mainly among older organisms. Like I said, this is an example of humans. This is what we usually experience in humans. The older organisms are the ones that die, whereas the young ones mostly survive. 2.3.1. I'm going to give you a few minutes to look at 2.3.1 as well as 2.3.2. It is about 6 marks. So you're just going to quickly look at these questions and attempt them on your own before we can have a discussion. All right, let's have a look at 2.3.1. It says both organisms of population A and B are oviparous. What is oviparous here? Oviparous is outside the body, inside an egg, right? That is what oviparous means. Explain the difference in the 2 survivorship curves, A and B, by referring to parental care. Now, with the graphs that we've been given, we are given A as fish, B as birds. A, they die young. B, they die as time goes on, right? Now, what is the difference in birds and what is between the birds and the fish in terms of parental care. There's more parental care in birds than there is in fish. Fish lay their eggs and let their eggs develop on their own, whereas birds create the nest to make sure that the eggs develop in the nest, and they take care of them and make sure that they are well taken care of and protected from predators until they are independent, which does not necessarily always happen with the fish, right? So that is why the way in which survival or survivorship happens is different. There is less parental care in fish than there is in birds. So because fish does not have parental care, predators feed on the eggs and the young, and therefore very few of the young would survive. Whereas in birds, there is parental care through protecting the eggs as well as protecting the young, and to increase the chances of survival. So that is how parental care in birds and in fish would differ. Both of them are oviparous, but the birds still take care of their developing eggs during the development phase. 2.3.2. The fish, which is Kev A, produce very large amounts of offspring, while humans, which is Kev C, in comparison, only produce a very small amount of offspring. Humans usually produce just one child at a time, twins sometimes. Explain this phenomenon as a survival strategy by referring to the type of fertilization. Now, when we are looking at the type of fertilization, in fish, we are looking at external fertilization. With humans, we are looking at internal fertilization. With fish, because there's a large amount of eggs and sperm cells and a large amount of offspring, those amount of eggs that are high improve the chances of survival or the chances of reproductive success, right? And in humans, because fertilization is internal, it usually increases the chances of fertilization. And then because they develop inside the mother's body, it also increases the chances of survival. So internal fertilization in humans is more certain as external fertilization, right? Because the male deposits the sperm inside the reproductive organ of the female, whereas in fish, fertilization is external, where predators and environmental factors can kill those eggs. So the production of a high number of eggs is actually an advantage to some extent, just to make sure that at least should anything happen to some of the eggs, some would still survive. Now let's have a look at activity 2. Read the extract below. Reproduction in guppy fish. The guppy fish have a very interesting method of breeding. During mating, the male deposits packets of sperm inside the female's reproductive opening using an organ called gonopodium. This process takes place several times, and the female stores some of the extra sperm. Right. The fertilized eggs remain in the female's body. Now, fertilized eggs, female's body, Ovovivipary. Right. As you are reading, just make sense of what you are reading, right? Until they hatch and the young are born live. The gestation period is usually about 22 to 28 days. That's a very short gestation period. So we can see the gonopodium that the male fish uses, and then we have the opening of the female's reproductive opening. So we have question 2.4.1 and 2.4.3 for 7 marks. So I will give you about 7 minutes to attempt this, and then we will have a look at the questions together. Let's have a look at the first one. It says, name the type of fertilization in guppies. So the type of fertilization here would be internal fertilization, because the male will insert the sperm cells into the female's body. Right. So what does it say here? The male deposits packets of sperm inside the female's reproductive organ. Now, that is all. Internal fertilization. Right. Secondly, it says, explain 2 ways in which the type of fertilization named Two ways in which internal fertilization increases reproductive success. Chances of fertilization are increased, and once fertilization has taken place, development is internal. Therefore, the young will be taken care of, will be protected from predators and any other environmental dangers that may occur. Right? The sperm are deposited inside, thereby increasing chances of fertilization. Once the chances of fertilization have increased, the chances of development now are also going to be increased, because that zygote that is inside the body will be protected from predators. If it is protected from predators, it means chances of survival are also going to be increased, increasing reproductive success as a whole. Right. The next one, why are the guppies regarded as ovoviviparous? We've already sort of looked at this. Remember, I said here, as you read while you are making sense of what you're reading. The fertilized eggs, once you talk about eggs, ovipary, ovo, right, remain in the female's body, vivipary. So this is a combination of ovipary eggs and vivipary. So that is why we say these are regarded as ovoviviparous. Right? So the fertilized egg hatches inside the mother's body, and then they can give birth after the fertilized egg, and then the young are born alive as well. This is also very important. Make sure that you mention that the young are born live. All right, now let's have a look at the amniotic egg. So the amniotic egg is made up of 4 membranes, which are referred to as the extra embryonic membranes. So we're going to look at how these membranes protect and help in nourishing the developing embryo. And we are also going to look at the fact that they are covered and surrounded by an egg shell. Now, the 4 membranes are the amnion, as we can see over here, and then the chorion on the outside, and then we have the allantois, and we also have the yolk sac. Amnion, chorion, allantois, as well as the yolk sac. Right, so we're going to look at what roles do these 4 membranes play in the development of the embryo inside the egg. Right, firstly we will start with the amnion. There we have the amnion. Within the amnion, between the amnion and the developing embryo, we have an amniotic cavity. Within that cavity we have the amniotic fluid. Right, and then this amniotic fluid provides cushioning for the developing young, meaning that there is going to be protection from any mechanical shock that can take place. If there is any harsh movement of the embryonic egg, the fluid or the water inside the amniotic cavity, which is the amniotic fluid, will make sure that the developing embryo is protected. Right, and then the chorion, which we see on the outer layer, that is important for gaseous exchange. Obviously, when we're talking about gaseous exchange, we are referring to the inward movement of oxygen and the release of carbon dioxide. So it makes sure that the embryo receives oxygen and the environment of the embryo releases the carbon dioxide, because we do not need the carbon dioxide to accumulate in that space. Right. Next, we have the allantois. It has 2 main functions here. The first one is also a gaseous exchange, just like the chorion. And secondly, it stores the waste products that are produced by the embryo. So remember, there can be some waste products that are produced by the embryo during some metabolic processes. So those will be stored until the egg hatches, because they cannot necessarily be removed, because there is no direct contact between the external environment and the inside of the egg. Right, and then the yolk sac contains the yolk. This is the nutrition for the embryo. This is where the embryo receives its food. Right, so it is the source of food for the embryo. Okay, and then we have the shell, which is on the outside. The shell on the outside prevents dehydration. Now, here, if we are looking at terrestrial organisms that are going to lay their eggs on land and not in water, it means that the shell is going to provide or protect that developing egg from being dehydrated, because there isn't any water that is going to keep the egg moisturized or moist. Right, let's have a look at activity 3, which we are looking at an amniotic egg. All right, the diagrams below show internal structures of an amniotic egg after fertilization, as well as a chick that hatched from the egg. Right, okay, we can see the amniotic fluid as well as the yolk sac. And then we have some questions there. We have about 8 marks. So we can have a look at the activity for about 8 to 10 minutes, and then we will come back and discuss it. Okay, 2.4.1, name the type of fertilization that has taken place. So because we are looking at an amniotic egg here, we can say that we are looking at external fertilization, right, or internal fertilization, because remember, with amniotic eggs, we can see internal fertilization, and we can also see external fertilization. And in chickens or birds, which we are seeing here actually, because it is in birds, then we can say that it is internal fertilization and not external fertilization. Remember, with external fertilization, it would usually be with organisms that live in water, right? Because they are going to release their sperm and eggs in the water, and then they would swim towards each other, right? 2.4.2, state the type of reproductive strategy which is shown by the development of an embryo within an amniotic egg, right? So if we look at what we are seeing there, we want to see the reproductive strategy that is taking place with the embryo that is developing inside that amniotic egg, right? So here we look at ovipary, right? Because it is inside an amniotic egg outside the mother's body. Therefore, we are looking at oviparity, oviparous, or ovipary, right? And then 2.4.3, identify the type of development that the hatched chick shows. Now let's have a look at that hatched chick one more time. As we can see, it cannot move, it cannot stand, it does not have down feathers, and it cannot see. The eyes are closed, which means that we are looking at altricial development because it is not well developed. Remember, precocial, prepared, altricial, underdeveloped. Give 2 functions of the amniotic fluid. We have just looked at those. And we know that with the amniotic fluid, we are looking at the fact that it is a shock absorber, or we can say it protects the fetus against mechanical shock, right? It also keeps the fetus moist because it is a fluid after all. So it keeps it or protects it from drying out, and it also protects it from temperature changes, meaning that if the temperature or the environmental changes occur, it gets too hot, it makes sure that the temperature inside the egg does not become as hot as the external environment. If it gets too cold, also it makes sure that it does not get too cold. It also allows for free movement and growth of that developing embryo during the period of development. 2.4.5, explain the size of the yolk sac. How the size of the yolk sac affects the development of the chick in the diagram. So remember, if the yolk sac is small, it means that there isn't enough yolk, there isn't enough nutrition or food. Therefore, the developing young will be underdeveloped, right? Whereas if there is enough yolk, the young will be well developed, right? So here the yolk sac was smaller, therefore the chick received less nutrients and it is less developed. How do we know that? We can see that the eyes are closed, no down feathers, it cannot stand or move or take care of itself. Right, now with precocial and altricial development, remember, precocial, prepared, meaning that it is well prepared, it can take care of itself, and with altricial, it cannot take care of itself. Now, here we look at food availability and predators in the environment as one of the two things that affect whether we experience precocial or altricial development. Now, in precocial development, we would usually see that there is enough food in this environment. However, there's also a lot of predators in the environment. Now, when we look at the food availability, that is one of the reasons why we end up with a precocial young, because there is enough food, there is enough nutrition, therefore the young would receive enough food during development. However, this is then important for this type of environment that they are in, because there are a lot of predators. It means that they will be able to take care of themselves in that environment and be able to avoid these predators, right? So the eggs would have a lot of energy, and because they have a lot of energy and a lot of food, it means that there's going to be more time for development. The more time there is for development, the greater the development in the egg, and the young would be born prepared, which is precocial. Let's just have a look at those physical characteristics of a precocial bed. We can see it is standing, its eyes are open, and it has down feathers, and also it can be able to feed itself, and it is independent of the parents. It's not dependent on the parents. All right. So it can move, meaning that it can leave the nest and it can feed itself and does not depend on the parents. All right, so they are able to leave the nest soon after hatching because to some extent they are able to avoid those predators. Okay, now in altricial development, it is quite the opposite of precocial. The environment has less predators, and because the environment has less predators, it means that these birds are not really in that much danger as compared to in precocial. However, the food availability is very low, hence the young are born very poorly developed because they have not received enough food. So the egg does not have enough food, nutrition is low, therefore they will be less developed. But that also would work somehow with the environment, because it means that they do not need to be that much developed as there isn't a lot of predators there, right? So there was less energy for development within that egg. There was less food as well. Therefore, the young will be poorly developed. As we can see in this diagram, they are underdeveloped. They cannot move. They cannot stand. Eyes are closed, no down feathers, and they are definitely dependent on parental care until they become well developed. Right, so they depend on their parents and they cannot feed themselves. So they are going to be spending a lot more time in the nest than with the precocial beds, right? Okay, let's look at parental care. So we are going to look at a few ways in which parents take care of their young, right? Firstly, they can take care of their young or provide care by building nests and burrows for their young. When they build the nest is to make sure that, and burrows is to make sure that their young have shelter. They are going to receive a place to stay, as they are going to be protected in these nests and the burrows, right? So an example of this would be the weaver beds, whereby we have the male weaver bed which builds nests and gives the nest to the female for approval. If the female does not think the nest is good enough, it would break the nest so that the male can build another one. Secondly, the care of eggs. As the eggs are laid, some organisms would take care of the eggs. They would make sure that the eggs are protected throughout that period of development, right? You would see that the hen would go around the eggs and have a look at them every now and then, just to make sure that they are protected and they are not eaten by predators. Also, we can see that in snakes, the snakes would surround the eggs and incubate them during that process of development. And we've just looked at Ovovivipary, whereby development takes place inside the mother's body, inside the egg. So this is another way in which the egg is taken care of inside the body of the mother. So sharks are an example of that type of development. All right. And then thirdly, provision of food for the unborn. So we have some organisms like the beetles over here, which make sure that they put aside enough food for the developing young so that when they are born, they would be able to receive enough food. So they collect the food, they roll them into small balls and leave them in the nest so that soon after hatching, the young would be able to receive food. Number 4, providing food after hatching or birth. We can see the mother here is providing food to these young as they may not be able to feed themselves at this point. And also we can see that the food is partially digested, meaning that the parent has digested the food to a certain extent so that the young can be able to take in the food, unlike giving the food to the young in a way in which they might not be able to digest the food. So that is another way in which parents take care of their young. Last activity for today, question 2.4 says the diagram below shows a bird's nest in a high tree with some newly hatched birds. As we can see, we have some newly hatched birds in that nest. Okay, about 8 minutes to go through the questions and then we will come back and discuss them. Please make sure you go through these. Please make sure you attempt it in writing. Don't just sit there and think about the answers. Write them down so that you practice. Remember, guys, practice makes perfect. Write these answers down. Make sure that you can see exactly what you would have answered in the examination, right? Also, that means you must give it your best, right? Now, once we come back, we will discuss this and you will be able to make corrections. Because you have written them down, you can be able to say, okay, here I shouldn't have said this. You scratch that out, you make the corrections. If you have given the correct answers, then you will be able to see that you are indeed ready for your exam. Let's have a look at 2.4.1. It says state 2 observable reasons. I'm always going to stress this part. Observable reasons, these are reasons that you can see, meaning that you cannot mention anything that is not in the diagram provided. 2 observable reasons why this type of development can be regarded as altricial. How do we see that this is altricial? The eyes are closed, they cannot move, they do not have down feathers, and they cannot feed themselves. So we can then see that this is altricial. Eyes closed, no feathers, and they cannot move. All right. 2.4.2, explain one advantage of the nest being high in the tree for the altricial development in an ecosystem. So because it is high up in the tree, it means that some predators may not be able to reach the tree, right, or the top of the tree. Therefore, this gives the young more protection. They are more protected high up in the trees, and they will also not be able to leave the trees and wander around to be eaten by predators. So not accessible to many predators since they cannot reach up in the trees, and that increases the chances of survival. Okay, 2.4.3, explain the volume of yolk in an amniotic egg of the bird that is precocial as compared to the size of the bird that is altricial. We've just looked at this in the previous activity. But now we are just comparing altricial and precocial. With precocial, obviously the volume of the yolk would be high. With altricial, the volume of the yolk will be low. How do we see this? The young in precocial are well developed, meaning that they have received enough nutrients. The young in altricial are not as well developed, meaning that they did not receive enough nutrients. That tells us that the yolk content was low in altricial and the yolk content in precocial was high. So the volume of the yolk in precocial birds will be more than altricial because it needs more nutrients to be born fully developed. Okay, our summary. This summary will help you a lot when looking at ovipary, vivipary, and ovoviviparous development. Now, as we have discussed, you will need to be able to know what type of fertilization happens. Ovipary is the only fertilization, the only development whereby fertilization is both internal and external, right? Internal fertilization and external fertilization. The other two, fertilization is internal, mainly because development is also internal. Okay, the fertilized egg is laid outside, not internally, meaning that even if internal fertilization occurs, the egg will be laid and allowed to develop outside. Right, and then the fertilized egg here, because remember, ovovivipary, we have an egg. This egg is fertilized internally and it develops internally. With vivipary, there's no egg. Development takes place inside the uterus, internal fertilization, internal development. And then the food for ovipary, the food is from the yolk because development is in the egg. Ovovivipary, food from the yolk again because development is in the egg. And lastly, vivipary, development is, food is from the placenta through the umbilical cord. The next one, how does birth take place here? So with ovipary, development was outside, therefore the egg will hatch outside. Ovovivipary, the egg is inside, it will hatch inside, and then birth will take place afterwards. With vivipary, birth takes place, there is no hatching of an egg. And then with ovipary, there is parental care, there may not be parental care. With ovovivipary, there is parental care inside the mother's body. And lastly, with vivipary, there's always parental care inside the mother's body. With precocial and altricial, pre means prepared, well developed, and then altricial will mean poorly developed. How do we see that? The young will be fully developed in precocial with their eyes open, with the down feathers. They are active or mobile, they can move around, and they are not confined to the nest, meaning that they can leave the nest soon after birth, and they do not depend on their parents fully. Altricial, they are not well developed. They are often naked, lacking down feathers or hair. They cannot move or fly, and they stay in the nest or the burrow for a few days before they can be able to leave the nest. So they need parental care first before they can be able to take care of themselves. So they are dependent on their parents. So the energy goes into parental care after birth. All right. In our next lesson, we will be looking at the structure of the male and the female reproductive system. Here we'll be looking at the structure and functions of these parts. We're just going to look at how the different parts of the male reproductive system function, how the parts of the female reproductive system functions. And then from there, we will then be able to go further into looking at the process of reproduction in humans. All right, we have come to the end of our lesson for today. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Goodbye.